Hello, this is your host Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. Today is a sixth debate in our Lyceum Debate series, entitled "Is the Catholic Church Harmful to the Good of the Nations?" I would like to thank the Distributist and Vergilius Rex for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
I think
Thank you.
we'll. Who wants to go first? Start the ball rolling. How about you, Vergilius? Why don't you start?
Okay, so where to start? So, the Catholic Church, and my position that I will defend, is that its institutional, both historically, currently, and on principle, has been a pervasive force on the good development and any kind of sovereignty of European nations and international nations as a whole. This I hold to be true not only on principle, as I said, but also on his historicity. And I'm criticizing the Catholic Church as a whole. Let this be understood. So, if I were to give examples of how this institution is pervasive to the good of the nations, first of all, let me say that the Catholic Church is an international institution, and it has always been so. By this sheer principle or fact, it is against nationhood, against nationalism. And by consequences, it is a destructive force against everything that we hold to be good of Western civilization. So,
Is that it?
yeah.
Okay, so it's my turn.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay, so the fact of the matter is that politics has always been international. It's always been international, and we've always had international interactions between civilizations. So the fact that there are international organizations is not something unique to the Catholic Church, nor is it something that it was invented by Rome. This is something that's been pervasive throughout human societies, and in particular, even the concept of the West. You use Western civilization. Is Western civilization a nation? Well, indeed, Western civilization is some concept that's transnational. I've never heard of Western civilization, the nation. So already from the outset, there's a contradiction here, and that seems to be that you're saying that things can only be national, but for some reason, Western civilization still needs to be preserved. So I think there's a lot of confusion here. What apparently is the case is that the Catholic Church is the organization that started Christendom, that organized Christendom, and that has essentially been the consistent force for organizing the defense of Christendom. Historically, it is without a doubt that the Catholic Church has done more to preserve the European continent from the invasion by Islamic forces than any other institution inside the framework of Europe. Without the Catholic Church, there is no Lepanto. Without the Catholic Church, there is no Gates of Vienna. Without the Catholic Church, the Turkish nation would have picked off the nations of Europe one by one by one. And a similar process of Muslimization or Islamification would have happened much earlier, with the subsequent complete destruction, most likely, of the European ethnicities, both on a biologic and cultural level. The only thing standing in between this process happening was the creation of a unified Catholic Church that could make the nations of Europe fight as one. And in this process, they've preserved the identity of Europe for 1,000 years, at least, if not more before then. And that's even leaving out the work it's done to essentially control the Vikings, essentially control the invasion of Europe by the Magyars, essentially control the invasion of Europe by the Huns. So what we're seeing does not really match up to the story that I'm hearing. You're saying the Catholic Church is a destroyer of nations. There isn't a single nation in Europe right now that would exist without the Catholic Church. So I know at this point, I think we really have to ask, well, what is the case to be made from a nationalist point of view against the Catholic Church? It's ridiculous. Europe wouldn't exist as a coherent concept without the Catholic Church. The West wouldn't exist as a coherent concept without the Catholic Church. And furthermore, the survival of most European cultures would not exist without the Catholic Church. So I guess I'm sort of at a loss at what at what the case is. And I will say that in defense, I think in order to sort of be anti-Catholic, I think you essentially have to be anti-Christian. You also have to be anti-European. You have to believe, in my opinion, that the Catholic Church was a bad force in history. That not only is Christianity not worthy, Christianity not worthy to be spread and furthered, the European peoples and the European cultures also deserve to be sublimated into the Asian whole. And that's where I would leave my case for the defense of the Catholic Church.
Well, I would say that is completely wrong, because Western civilization does not begin with the Christian Church, not even the Catholic branch of Christianity as a whole. And I certainly do not agree that the Catholic Church can define Christianity as a whole, can be standard bearer with so much pride. So certainly
it was historically
up to what point? We cannot say that
Great Schism.
We cannot say that nations existed on the Roman Empire because they were destroyed, but we can see that the birth of the Catholic Church was based upon the Roman imperial model, and which it kept as a monarchical form of institution. One of those consequences which it had was its invasive policy on international affairs.
So can I understand this? You're saying that the Roman Empire was bad and the Catholic Church was wrong to preserve parts of its structure?
No,
we're talking about two different time periods. First of all,
I'm trying to understand your specific indictment.
Well, let
Vergilius
finish his thought. He let you speak.
Go ahead.
So this is the thing. We must confirm the role of the development of the nation state with the good or the development of Western civilization. You also equated, that's one thing, but you also equated Western civilization to be Catholicism, to be the church, which is completely wrong. We can argue, indeed, that the Catholic Church kept Western civilization, Greek-Roman civilization, in its monasteries. Yes, but that predates Christianity, and Christianity was not the only religion to keep said manuscripts. For example, we have the Sasanians, which when the Byzantine Empire began to crumble a little, many scholars fled to the Persian Empire, and they became a beacon of Western culture. Then we have the Abbasids, which promoted said Western culture, which is not the same as Christian culture, in their schools of learning. So that's not something specific to the Catholic Church, and that misses one of the good points that you could argue for the Catholic Church. Now, for the bad points of the Catholic Church, we can see that it is an institution that was created on a context without nationhood. There was no nationhood in Rome. There was only the empire and whatever of its struggles that existed. Nations began after its crumble with the melting of the different provinces with the invading Germanic tribes. Like the Frankish became the French with the melting of the Frankish Germanic people and the established Gallic Roman people in the province of Gaul. So, first of all, we didn't have nations, but when we started to have nations in Europe again, and this is again assuming that the nationhood and the development of nationalism is a positive force on culture and Westernhood, the Catholic Church, historically since the Middle Ages, has been against that. First of all, with its violation of sovereignty, because it did not have borders. The Catholic Church did not recognize sovereign borders. It was the universal church, yes? So it felt free to own land whenever it pleased and to impose laws and collection of taxes whenever it pleased, against the sovereignty of the developing nations. One example of this is in the end of the 13th century, we have the French king Philip IV, which tries to establish state authority, monarchical authority on the kingdom. And boof, immediately we have the Pope complaining that he's not getting his money. Very spiritual there. Of course, he would not argue on that side, but this led to the creation of the States General in France, which is nothing but the affirmation of state or proto-national sovereignty against the internationalist pedantry of the papacy, of the Catholic Church. And
Okay.
Well, let Dave step
When
in
do I
here
get
real
to
fast.
ask questions about this?
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, Dave.
I guess this is sort of why I like formats, because I know exactly when I can ask questions. So I'm hearing a lot of criticisms, but they seem to be contradicting each other, frankly. Are you saying that the Abbasid Caliphate was a proper vestibule for Western civilization? Are you saying that Islamism is essentially Western because they preserved because they had Aristotle written down? Are you making that case?
I'm saying that the fact that the Christian Church, the Catholic Church, preserved said works of culture is not that particular to the Catholic Church.
I never said anything about preserving. I'm asking you whether you said the Abbasid Caliphate had Western culture and that the Persian Empire had Western culture.
The point is that
are you standing by the Persian and Islamic civilizations as instances of Western culture? In which case, how do you define Western culture?
The point is that the preservation of culture is not the same as of promotion of culture. Yes, the promotion of those volumes and volumes that were kept in the monasteries did not really occur until the Renaissance, which was when people like Petrarch were to copy those books on the monasteries, print them with their bourgeois money, and spread them to circles outside the church.
No, I don't think that this is. I think this is an historical anachronism. The role that the Catholic Church had during the Middle Ages wasn't any different from anyone else. They had old texts around, and they just they were read by people who could read, which was almost nobody who wasn't inside the church. But that's neither here nor there. The other thing is unusual is you're saying that. So you think the Roman Empire was bad because it didn't have nations? If I'm understanding this properly.
The late Roman Empire was, was the definition.
No, just the Roman Empire, period.
Well,
it's bad because
if we are going to go back, then we can.
I do want to go back
at the golden age of the Western world.
Yeah. Let's take August.
Is when there were nations. Okay, when we have nations, where we have the Greek nations or the Roman nations, nations, sovereign states.
Hold on. We got to do one at a time here. So let's I think the big confusion here is what is a nation. So to help answer your question, Dave, Vergilius, why don't you define what is a nation so that we're on the same page?
Sure.
A nation is a particular people. What makes its particularity is ascendancy, heritage, culture, history, and this whole set of objects is organized politically in a nation state. We cannot really talk historically of nations when they are enslaved too much.
So was the Athenian League a nation, or was it an empire that enslaved people?
What's the point with that?
Well, because it helps me understand whether this golden age you're talking about was one of nations or one of empires.
Okay, so I will explain the situation in antiquity to you, where we see every political entity is basically a national entity. Its whole political organization is based on a people. Yes, we have the Roman state, which is the state of the Romans. We have the Persian Empire, which is an empire for the Persians.
This is what I'm asking, though. The Roman state and the Persian state were not restricted to one people.
Come on, really? The Persian Empire.
I'm being totally sincere here.
Collected tributes from all of Asia and distributed them in Susa, Persepolis, and Babylon, because that is where the Persians lived.
Yes. Does the Persian Empire contain simply one nation, or were there enthralled people?
You
know the answer.
The organization.
There's only one right answer.
The organization is directed to a specific kind of people. The national prerogative is clear. It is fuzzy. You are trying to argue, I think, that because it is a empire, it is not nationalistic, but that is wrong, because we must understand that the Persian Empire extended the influence of the Persian people to the whole of Asia, to the satrapies, and the collection of taxes to the homelands of the Persian people. Yes.
Oh, okay, so one nation, one people's ruling over other peoples in an empire is still a nation.
For the Persians, it is.
So by extension, Rome was a nation. So you can have essentially one group of people holding in thrall a bunch of other ethnicities, and that still is not incompatible with a nation under your reading.
The system of territories on how they ruled over other people in those territories made a clear distinction between the nation for which those territories, the body politic, appertained to, and those which were not, which were the slaves or the conquered peoples.
Okay, I'll put this.
So think about this. Even if in the later stages of the Roman Republic, we see the same principle. We see Romans and non-Romans living under the Roman state. What makes it nationalistic is that it focuses on a group of people called Romans, which is a national prerogative. Indeed.
So was the Abbasid Caliphate a nation under the same designation? And if it wasn't, how wasn't it?
I mean, for example, it had some sense of nationhood, but it was not. But
why not? I mean by wasn't it the same? Why? How is it different than the Roman Empire?
I mean, what are you trying to get at by this?
Well, I'm just saying, you seem to be implying that the Roman state, when it had absolute control over its provinces, exerted more influence against the peoples that it ruled over than the Catholic Church did against France in the Renaissance and Middle Ages, which is just flatly false.
My point that I'm trying to argue is that when a state is organized around a people in a national sense, it will be way better than a state which is not. One of the reasons for the decline of the Romans was that it became an empire. Yes. So
no, I don't understand the distinction. So you're saying that the decline of Rome happened what exact time frame? Like Augustus, Julius Caesar, or was it when it took Sicily and Carthage and Spain, or was it when it started incurring into Greece? Like, when did the Roman Empire cease becoming a nation and start becoming an empire? This is what's so confused. You're telling me that the Persian Empire was a nation, not an empire. Then you're saying that the Rome was a nation that it wasn't, and I don't know what the line was.
I mean, let's compare it with modern states, okay? Which are
let's stick with the example you gave, the Roman Empire.
No, it is completely pertinent because it is the same.
Well, you brought it up, so I want an explanation for the Roman.
Okay, I will explain. To compare these nation states we have on our age, on our modern times, is basically the same modern nation state that we had in antiquity. The end of antiquity comes with the destruction of those classical nations. But if you survived, you cannot really point today and see Iberians or Gauls or Phrygians because they died out. So what I'm trying to argue is that many of the great ideas that impulse Western civilization are indissociable from national principles.
This did not answer my question. My question was, when did Rome cease becoming a nation? The specific time frame. Specific.
If I can step in here, I think the question you're asking, Dave, is what constitutes an empire, right?
And what differentiates it from a nation? Because you're saying that the Persian Empire was a nation, but the Abbasid Caliphate was not a nation.
Yeah, so how about...
Or the Roman Empire was a nation, then it wasn't? It's so confusing. I have no idea what the point is.
So why don't you explain what an empire is, VRX, and how that differs from a nation?
It becomes an empire as such when it ceases to have a national prerogative. Yes, so we have the same thing in Rome, and we cannot point just at this date or this moment because it comes by decrees. So that's very fallacious for you to do that. So I will point to specific moments.
It's an honest question. It's not
Okay, I will point to
about that.
specific moments to answer your question. Yes. First
Sure.
of all, we have the creation of the Principate under Augustus, which destroys the legitimacy of the Senate, which was the patriarchal aristocratic center of Rome, which was by heritage. It was basically a caste of people. Yes, that was erased.
The Christians, yes.
Okay, so that was destroyed. It was no longer organic, so to speak. We have that. Then we have, for example, the Edict of Caracalla, which made every people living under the empire citizens. Yes, and that's the thing.
Eligible for citizenship.
Well, it doesn't matter. It universalized citizenship. It universalized
saying that
okay?
It universalized the possibility of citizenship, and this is
yes. That if you want a date, that's the moment where we don't talk about Romans as a nationality because it ceased to exist. Yes?
So if I get you right, it's all right for a nation to hold other nations under thrall as long as they are explicit about their ethnic, as long as they hold their ethnicity tight amongst themselves.
No, I didn't say that imperialism was good. In fact, I'm arguing against that because imperialism relativizes the nation as it relativizes the Roman people. Yes, so that's
okay. So
that's an anti-imperialist.
But I guess this is my thing, right? So under the Catholic Church, the Europe went from being an empire to being nations. So wouldn't you appreciate that transformation?
The transformation of nations in Europe, yes, is progressive and was halted and obstructed by the church. I gave the example of Philip IV that tried to implement a royal sovereignty, yes, on the kingdom, and that was against the wishes of the Catholic Church.
But these things are specific things because for every instance where you have a king and a pope that got in conflict, I can list you 3 where the pope literally crowned someone king of the Magyars or king of the Danes or king of the... I mean, there's frequent instances where the pope literally created nations among new peoples in Europe. So it seems like you're just taking a few instances where the Pope got into a property dispute with a particular king over church property and saying, well, this makes it so that the church was against nations. This was hardly an accusation in the past.
Real quick, as a clarification point, just to make sure that we get the definitions down, would it be fair to say, Vergilius, that a nation is a political organization where the particular ethnos has laws in place that protect its identity, and an empire is where all the identities are blurred together into this sort of like mishmash?
Yes, where the state is the prominence, not the nation.
Okay, so that Distributist is I think what Vergilius is using when he uses those terms.
Well, in that case, I would maintain that the actual development of Christian Europe went from one of an empire, which it was under the pagans, to being one of nations, which it was under Christendom. In Christendom, after 1000 AD, there was incredibly little ethnic displacement. And I want to make this absolutely clear, because ethnic displacement was very, very common inside the Roman Empire. It was very, very common inside the Caliphate. There was a lot of ethnic displacement. But for the peoples living in Christendom, if you were living in Christendom when the Catholic Church came into power, I mean, we really say the Catholic Church didn't really get its power until about 900 to 1000 AD, because before that it was fighting tooth and nail against invaders and other heresies. But if you, post the Catholic Church taking power in Europe, if you were a European people living in an area, it's very, very, very likely that your descendants are still living here until essentially the decline of Christian power in Europe in the 20th century. So what's so ironic about what you're saying is that the only era and the most stable ethnic period in European history was the period that was ruled over by the Catholic Church. The mixture of Franks and Gauls that live in France are the same people that lived there in 800 and 900 AD. The mixture of Celts and Anglo-Saxons in the British Isles were the same people now that living in, essentially the same people from 1900 to 1000 AD. And the same thing for the Germans. The amount of ethnic displacement inside of Europe was uniquely stable in the history of Europe, and that stability was persistent nowhere else. It certainly was not persistent in the Muslim world. If you look at 1000 AD in Egypt, you'll see the fact that most of the people living there were Coptic Christians. Now it's almost all Arabs. And that Arabization took place everywhere that Islam was persistent, even in Persia for that matter, even in India. So what we're saying, you're saying that the most stable, what characterizes the most ethnically stable nations in human history is actually what undermines ethnically stable nations. I have a hard time believing that.
I will hold that because the cause of that ethnic stability is serfdom. Yes, so basically slavery was the reason of why we have this continuous stability of ethnicity.
So you compared to what? Compared to what?
No, compared to what not? I mean, I'm arguing that serfdom.
You're not going to anachronistically compare serfdom. Compare serfdom to what went on before and during that time.
Well, do you mean the classical age?
Classical age, or hey, why not the Muslim empires?
Well, if we define the classical age as the foundation of Western culture, and if we compare that to the little creation of culture up until the 13th century in Europe, then yes, I will say that it is way better despite its violent consequences of ethnic displacement.
But those were slave economies.
Yes, that was the classical age.
The slaves had less rights than serfs.
You cannot remove a problem without another one's arising. Of course not.
Oh, okay, but so you're saying that Catholic Europe had more ethnic stability, less slavery, and serfs had more rights than slaves, but still somehow classic antiquity was a better system? I fail to see why.
Well, I wouldn't argue for classical antiquity to be the perfect society.
Well, no, we're doing comparative. We're comparing it to the medieval system.
Yeah, but if we compare one time age to another, when we can always find it was what, this was better, this was worse.
I offered you the comparison to the Muslim world.
It is an endless. But the point here that I'm trying to make, yes, is the sovereignty of the nations of Europe. As they are now, that's the point. That's the prerogative, yes? So,
well, I don't really care. I mean, you're the one who really want. I mean, sovereignty of nations to you seems like it really depends on ethnic consistency, right? Is that am I correct in thinking that?
Well, there is no nation if there is no ethnicity. There is no nation.
Well, this is the problem because it seems historically that Europe has, in the absence of Christianity, Europe before and after Christianity is incredibly ethnically unstable. When we de-Christianized Europe, it became ethnically unstable.
That was one of its flaws, indeed. That's how the Romans killed themselves. That's the point.
This is a coincidence?
No, I mean, if you argue that the Catholic Church had how you say it, had a value in maintaining that stabilization, yes, it had ethnic stabilization, but did it hold the nationality and the nationalism of Europe? It did.
Compared to what, though? It did it better than anything before or afterwards. Here's the problem, man, right? Like, the thing is that it's just, you seem to be comparing the Catholic Church to some abstract ideal. If we compare the Catholic Church on your metrics to what came before it, it's better. If we compare the Catholic Church to what other systems, what other civilizational systems did, like the Abbasid Caliphate, which you mentioned, it's better than the Abbasid Caliphate. If we compare the Catholic Church's providence, technology notwithstanding, to what we have now with the modern EU and massive ethnic displacement, well, on that standard, it's also better. So no matter what direction we compare the Catholic Church to, it still wins. So we could compare it to some abstract utopian ideal, but I don't think that's very fair. Nothing is good by that comparison.
It's not an abstract utopian ideal. I mean,
So what are you comparing it to then?
the development of Western culture becomes greater and better when it is founded on a nationalistic context. Again, you can argue that the classical age was tumultuous and disordered and had slaves. Yes, but the creation of such culture came only under such nationalistic prerogatives. That's one of its perks. And if you are trying to argue that you cannot have a push for nationalism without the instability of that ethnic classical destruction, then that's wrong, because we have the modern age when we have a new push for nationalism from the Renaissance, developed, theorizing the Renaissance, and then came under act and actuality in the 19th century. That's what I'm arguing for.
You want the nationalism that was essentially developed in Catholic Europe and has since disintegrated with the de-Christianization of Europe.
I mean, if we're going to talk about de-Christianization, I can certainly point the Catholic Church for one of the causes of said de-Christianization of Europe, how arrogantly they acted, for example, in the French Revolution.
That was not one of the causes of the de-Christianization of Europe.
Oh, was it not?
It was not.
Finish his point, Dave.
Go ahead.
So, okay, I will demonstrate to you how the Catholic Church and the Pope were basically one of the greatest causes for the Christianization in Europe, and specifically in France, yes? And this comes, again, with the question of national sovereignty. So it is, let's say, it is 1791, yes? We have the Kingdom of France, which is now a national kingdom, when the King Louis XVI comes from being the King of France to King of the French, and the National Assembly institutes the Constitution of the Civil Clergy, when the clergy must pay a serment of an oath of loyalty to the nation. The Pope refuses. Yes, the Pope refuses for the church in France to be loyal to the nation. No, he cannot do that. So he goes to the king, yes? He goes to the king and basically commands him to ignore the wishes and the national, yes, the national decision for the good of the Pope. And what do you have is that you put the Pope and the king, the monarch as a whole, against the good of the nation. Yes, the people of France became so disgusted by that. It was so treason, so treacherous, that the Christianization was legitimized.
So wait, hold on. You're saying the French Revolution's inciting element, what was a refusal of the clergy to take an oath to the king?
It is their arrogance. It is also the arrogance of the nobility.
I think it's not their arrogance.
Dave, let him finish first.
I mean, I cannot. I mean, you must understand with me that the nobility and the Catholic Church, a landed aristocracy, that it was the Catholic Church, was very arrogant of their privileges, especially if there were in questions of land and money. Yes, they were obviously against the nationalization in France because it went against their privileges. And one of their privileges is, again, this internationalism that I was speaking about. Yes, it is the international nobility that was coalized against France, and the international Catholic Church, of course.
So you're saying that the Catholic Church was pro-Jacobin revolution?
You're not hearing what I'm saying. It is the arrogance.
I need to clarify this, right? Because look, I'm reading.
Okay. I have a
right
metaphor.
now. I'm reading Joseph de Maistre, who was one of the primary loyalistic thinkers of this era. Primary source. He believes that the Catholic Church was a force that could have saved France from the revolution. And he was involved in that entire time frame's political debate. So I find it very difficult to believe that this idea that a slight disagreement between the king and a pope either was the facilitating element of the revolution, or that somehow international forces facilitated by the Catholic Church were trying to instigate a revolution. It doesn't seem to match up with my reading of the situation at all from primary sources.
They are to be judged on the consequences of their actions. Yes?
You haven't demonstrated that those are the consequences of their actions.
Of course there are the consequences. I already told you that the arrogance of the Pope and of the nobility, which the nobility is backed by the Catholic Church on monarchism, was so arrogant and so selfish that it is the antithesis of nationalism. Yes? It is the international violating the national sovereignty.
So can I interrogate this? Was the arrogance of Louis XIV?
Well, was
he part of internationalism in his arrogance, or was he nationalism?
Of course he was internationalist. Didn't he fled to Bahrain?
Okay,
so didn't he abide the wishes of his wife, the Austrian?
How far back do you have to go to get to the good king, I guess, in your evaluation?
The thing with monarchy, yes, is that the good kings are only accidental. The good kings of France are those which asserted the authority of the French kingdom. We have Philippe Auguste. We have Philippe le Bel. Yes. We have Louis XIV.
Well, I thought you said he was an internationalist.
Oh my God. Of course he is, but understand.
Well,
I'm
sorry, it just sounds like you're contradicting yourself. I know you're frustrated, but it is
because it is accidental. That's the main thing. It can only be good for the nation accidentally. A king can only be good to the nation accidentally. If the king is bound by the laws of feudalism, it is likely that he will abide by those internationalist prerogatives. Understand that the king passed from being the king of France, yes, a mere geographical location, to the king of the French, a nationality.
Okay,
he went against that.
So I'm just trying to understand what you want, right?
So okay,
I mean, it seems Louis XIV, most people consider Louis XIV to be the height of French nationalism in the way that most people who use that word mean it.
Yes, because he was interested in the affairs of France. That's the thing. But you cannot be secure that the next king will not. That's the thing with monarchy.
That's the flaw of monarchy, yes.
Yes.
But are we saying that the flaw of I don't see how the flaw of monarchy is the fault of the Catholic Church. The flaw of monarchy was the problem.
So I mean, wasn't the Catholic Church one of the primary defenders?
Rex. Let's let Dave finish his thought, and then you.
Okay. Yeah. So here's the thing: monarchies before the Catholic Church had this problem. Monarchies in the Muslim world had this problem. Monarchies in China had this problem. So you can't take a problem that's extensive everywhere and then say, in this region where this problem occurs, we'll blame the religion of the region, even though it's worse everywhere else where the religion isn't the case.
But the Catholic Church is the defender of the monarchy. That's the main thing. I mean, you cannot dissociate the defense of monarchism in the great debates of the 19th century without the Catholic Church. They go hand in hand. The conservatives.
Let finish. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
The conservatives, and this is true in Mexico. This is true in France. Yes, in Italy, the conservatives were the monarchists and those who defended the privileges of the Catholic Church. It was indissociable. You cannot talk about monarchy and all its flaws without the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, again, as this internationalist institution, was also one of the main proponents of monarchism. And that
you literally can talk about monarchism without the Catholic Church because they were non-Catholic monarchies.
Yes, but we are talking about the Catholic Church specifically. Those countries, those kingdoms in which the Catholic Church was present and had force, it was always you would always see that it supported the monarchy, and if you were against the monarch, you were against the Catholic Church. So, if you wanted to degrade or to criticize the flaws of the monarchy, you are also criticizing the flaws of the Catholic Church.
No, because this is not how we do things scientifically. If I were to say, look, treatment A causes this problem, and I show, okay, treatment A, the subject has this problem, but then I go, okay, well, our control groups also have this problem, then we can't blame treatment A for that problem occurring, right? Because we see that the problem occurs even in societies where that treatment isn't being carried out. So this is a huge problem for your case, I'm afraid. If you're saying monarchy was the default system of the entire world. So, but I have to ask you a question. So you're anti-monarchy, but pro-nation.
Of course. I mean, monarchy is...
But you're fine with empires as long as they assert a specific...
When did I say that empires were fine? I said the contrary, that the imperialism of the classical age destroyed the nations.
Okay, well, sorry, originally I thought you said that the imperialism of the Persian Empire and the Athenian League was fine, but maybe I misheard that. I'm sorry.
I don't say it didn't. I didn't say that it was fine. I said that in the classical age, mostly everything was organized according to a national principle. For example, if we compare this with the medieval ages. Let me speak. If we compare the classical age, even the empires, with the Middle Ages, we see a contrast on the national prerogative. Yes? So if we compare the Holy Roman Empire with the Persian Empire, we see that the Persian Empire had more national prerogatives than the Holy Roman Empire. Even if they... Okay, so I'm not defending imperialism. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, maybe you could explain to me how the what is a national prerogative and how does the Persian Empire have it more than the Holy Roman Empire?
Okay, so 6th century, okay, we have the revolt of the Persians against the Medes. So we have Cyrus, and Cyrus discusses with his... that was later. And Cyrus leads the people of Persia, yes, to become the Persian Empire. Now, understand the national prerogative is that this empire is for the Persians. Yes, it's for the group Persian, not for the Medes and not for the Phrygians, for the Assyrians. It's for the Persians. You don't see any of these in the Middle Ages. You don't see a specific nation asserting itself in this way, even if it is imperialism, which is anti-nationalistic.
I mean, the Venetians, even the French, you could say, right? I mean, the French and the Venetians were both empires for a specific people. The Holy Roman Empire was highly decentralized. Is that what you mean? You're by a national prerogative, you mean to say that the Holy Roman Empire was more decentralized than
the prerogative of the Middle Ages is the land. Yes, it's the land and the privilege. That's the organization of the Middle Ages. Is the privilege of someone and the land. Yes,
and the people attached to the land, right?
The organization, the organization of antiquity is of peoples.
Well, yes. And this is one reason why Christian Europe was so stable ethnically, right? It's because of the high respect of the people on the land and the fact that people move political organizations without, say, exterminating entire populations, as was very common.
If you can call slavery respect, yes.
Okay, but you were aware that the Persians had slaves, right?
Yeah, but you're saying that the Catholic Church
I'm saying we're going back on something we already established. We already established that there was slavery in the ancient empires. So pointing out that there was serfdom in Europe is not something that somehow marks it as distinct from the ancient world. As a matter of fact, serfdom was a lot better than being a slave in Rome. So the serfs had certain rights of a sort of prototypical way that slaves did not have in Rome. So so I think this is just a dead end. I think we're just trying to obscure what's actually going on. What is very apparent, though, is the Persian Empire massively displaced peoples and replaced them with other ones. Whereas in Europe, the fact that peoples were so attached to the land that when there was a battle, we were like, okay, well, this king now rules you. The king Henry V rules you as opposed to Charles IV or whatever, and you're still the same. You're still people from Normandy, whatever. Work your land and have your own affairs, right? So because of this, because political changes did not necessarily have to imply movements of ethnicities. You have the same people living in Normandy from 1000 AD to 1900 AD. And only when that Christian idea, that politics could be separated from ethnicity, only when that fractured with the de-Christianization of Europe, is that ethnic stability that we saw for the last 1000 years finally coming into question, with perhaps the largest de-ethnization of Europe that we've ever seen since Christianity became prominent in the continent.
Okay, go ahead, Vrex.
Did we lose him?
I don't know. Is he here, Vrex?
Yeah, it cut off. Sorry.
All right, so go ahead. Go ahead and respond now.
Yeah, but you just said that you could be ruled by the King of England if you were French. What the hell? There is no national sovereignty there. Even if there is ethnic consistency, there is no national sovereignty. There is no constituency into nation. There is no determination of that ethnic, even if it is maintained, to rule themselves. That's the thing. You just defended that, and.
But there was
by national sovereignty, can we agree on the Westphalian Consensus? Is that what you have in mind, Vergilius?
In some ways, but I think the national sovereignty, the question of national sovereignty, really exemplifies itself on the French Revolution, which is really the radical making of laws by a group of people, a nation, for themselves. Yes, that is against any order and papal bull or any kind of right of the international nobility to be ruled by them. That's
But this is what kicked off our current de-Christianized age.
Okay. So this is the point. Okay, because you are arguing that there was ethnic stability. The safety. So you prefer the safety than the freedom because the freedom is dangerous. You have the responsibility of losing everything. Of course,
if freedom is,
of course, you have that responsibility.
Let's finish.
Go ahead.
You have the responsibility of losing everything. Yes, that's the responsibility of being in control yourself. Of course, if the nation is in control of itself, it risks losing everything, as we see today, that they are replacing themselves with migration. But
Yeah,
do you really say that slavery and to be subject is better? Come on.
I say that republic or not, I say that the Christian Europe was what kept Europe ethnically stable. And now that it's been de-Christianized, it is ethnically replacing itself. And people will look back and see whether they thought that the stability of Christian Europe was better than the instability that our current secular elites are hoisting upon them. Because our current secular elites are absolutely the children of the French Revolution, and they're absolutely taking the nation of France down with them.
So the Catholic Church is not promoting the destruction of the nations today. Come on.
The Catholic Church has been compromised by the current secular attitude of Europe. The Catholic Church, in its historical sense, has never challenged people's ability to rule themselves ethnically, and continues to promote that.
Yeah,
in its doctrine,
it did challenge that. Don't you remember that the Catholic Church is the first defender of the monarchy and the feudal system? Yes, of course, it was against that. It was against national sovereignty in every sense of the word.
So Vergilius, I'm not to cut off the host. I'm just really unclear what you're for. it seems like you're for the nation, but you're also for situations where the ethnicity of the nation is destroyed. That you're for antiquity, but you don't like any of the governmental forms of antiquity, and so all I get is sort of like this shifting goalpost where it seems like you have some kind of ideal that I never seen in actual reality, and we're holding it up against real world examples of compromise.
Okay, you want an example, and for the fact I didn't say that I didn't like any form of government in antiquity, for I do love the form of the Roman Republic, which, if you analyze it, one of its greatness was that it was the most patriotic political entity in the classical world. You cannot really talk about the Roman Republic without talking about its patriotism, about civic virtue. It is indissociable. And you cannot talk about the decadence of the Romans without talking about the lack of civic virtue and patriotism. That's what I'm arguing for.
So, for instance, if we, so let me get this straight. This is the Roman Empire before the Punic Wars and when they started accumulating an empire?
I'm talking about the Roman Republic.
The Roman Republic accumulated an empire starting with the Punic Wars.
Yes, that is one of the causes of its degeneracy.
Actually, the Roman Republic was the entity that created the empire. The empire actually did not create the empire. I'm being absolutely serious here. This is true.
Okay, so
this is historical fact.
Okay, so
Julius finish his statement. He's answering your question.
Is the observance of republican principles the cause of imperialism, or is the lack of them?
Oh, I'm just trying to understand what specific era of Roman history you think is admirable.
No, because you're making the accusation that the Roman Republic is basically the cause of the Roman Empire.
It is. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's cause. The Roman Republic created the Roman Empire. No, are we debating this fact? This is not this is a historical fact.
Let's talk about the principles.
Wait, no. I need you to get on this fact. The Roman Republic created the Roman Empire. Do you agree with that? And not scoff.
Okay,
yes or no?
What is the Roman Republic?
I know. No, stop. Let's get this fact straight.
Is it Augustus? Is Augustus the Roman Republic?
No, the generals. Augustus didn't create the empire. Augustus inherited the empire.
Ah, so is Julius the Roman Republic? Is Julius Caesar Rome?
No. Look, even Julius Caesar only put the cherry on top of the Roman Empire. Most of their possessions came from before that. It was Republican generals. And Julius Caesar, when he did most of his conquering, was a Republican general.
Yeah, so Julius Caesar conquered the provinces for Rome and not for himself. He didn't try to aggrandize himself and his image instead of that of Rome. No.
And the earlier conquests were for Roman Republic too. They were all in the name of the Roman Republic. Yes. All of the expansion the Romans did was under the Republic. So, historians will tell you this, Vergilius.
So is Catilina the same as Cato because they were Romans?
Well, Cato was in support of the Roman Republic supported the expansion of the empire. And the reason, do you know why the Roman Empire expanded so quickly after the Punic Wars? It's because people were literally using conquests of other countries as funding mechanisms for their election campaigns in Rome. So if you wanted to get elected consul, the best thing you could do was like go over, take Lycia, raid it, get a bunch of gold and slaves, ship them back to Rome, pay off all your political offices, and go for and then put yourself forward as consul. And with that booty, you could actually get yourself elected. That's why the Roman Empire expanded so quickly under the Republic, and why after it became an empire under Augustus, it basically never expanded after that. The Roman Empire was instituted to stop the expansion of the Roman territories, not to facilitate more.
I ask the question again. Is the creation of the Roman Empire the consequences of the observance of republican principles or the lack of them?
The expansion of the Roman Empire was absolutely the consequence of the Republic. Yes. unfortunately, by the exact mechanism I laid out. It doesn't mean that, it does not mean that all republics have to do it, but the exact mechanism I laid out was how it happened. There is an incentive for leaders to constantly capture more territory in order to fund election campaigns in Rome.
So basically, you're saying that
this is a bad thing. It's a fact that this happened.
Julius Caesar was a Republican, apparently.
No, I mean, he considered himself a Republican, even though he wanted to be a dictator. A dictator was an elected office of the Republic. But for instance, a great Republican leader, Donatus, also was dictator, but he saw himself as a Republican. And all the consuls, Julius Caesar was not the only person to expand the Republic's territory. In fact, the last few little pieces of conquest, most of the expansion was from previous generals who absolutely saw themselves as part of the Republic.
Okay, I'm going to interject here. There's a bit of confusion. I'm going to try to clear this up. So the question you're asking Dave, Vergilius, is, was the consistent adherence to Republican principles the cause of the empire, or was the empire caused by rejecting those principles? Is that the question, Vergilius?
That is the question, and he doesn't seem to answer it.
Okay, but what is the principle?
Clarified. How would you answer that, Dave?
What is a principle? The existence of elections for consul did expand the empire, but are elections for the consul a Republican principle?
It is the corruption of the Republican principles of Rome that led to the creation of the empire, and it's
I'm not so sure what
everything that was Roman.
So this is the problem. I'll clear it, Todd. The problem is I don't understand how to historically read principles as being true principles or corrupted principles. Now, the consul election system caused the expansion of the Roman Republic. I don't know if this is a corrupted principle or a true principle, but it did cause the expansion of the Republic.
Okay.
And that stopped it from expanding.
We got about 5 minutes left. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make the final statements about the 2 points of view that have been articulated tonight. So we'll begin with you, Dave, since Vergilius went first. You can give your final statements on where you think this is and what has or hasn't been demonstrated.
Okay, so the Catholic Church supports the stability of Christian nations. It has for all time, and its opposition to republicanism was essentially in favor of stability. The Catholic Church is not an organization that thinks monarchies are the best. It's happened to be on the pro side of monarchies most of the time in the 19th century for completely incidental reasons. But if you look back into medieval history, you'll see that the Italian republics that existed after the fall of the Roman empires were supported by the Catholic Church. Most notably, I may add, would be the Serene Republic of Venice, which had Catholic support, and even though it was a republic from before the end of the Dark Ages and before the beginning of the Renaissance in 1000 AD. The only thing that the Catholic Church supports is stability of Christendom and the continuance of Christendom going forward and the continuance of the faith going forward. And through the persistence of the Christian faith, Europe experienced the only period of ethnic stability that it has ever seen in its entire history. If you are somebody who supports nationalism in this age and you do not want to see ethnic replacement, I think you should ask yourself why the Catholic Church brought forward an ethnic stability that was never seen in Europe before it gained prominence and apparently may never be seen after Europe has lost Christianity. And really the support for governments, whether they're republics like Venice, which the Catholic Church supported, or that there are monarchies like the Louis in France that it supported, is really incidental to its entire mission. So I will end with that.
Okay, so now you get your concluding statement, Vergilius.
Right, so I will quote from Machiavelli, the Discourses, where he talks about the papal church, the Catholic Church. The papal court and the bad example it says has led to the utter loss of piety and religion in Italy. It has brought about endless disadvantages and turmoil, because as one might presume that where there is religion, there is every good. Where religion is lacking, one might presume the opposite. We Italians have the church and the priest to thank for the fact that we have become irreligious and evil, but we also owe the church another greater debt. And the second cause of our ruin. This is the church has kept and is still keeping Italy divided In fact, no land has ever been united or happy unless it is completely under the rule of a republic or prince, as has happened in France and Spain. It is because of the church that Italy is not in such a position and does not have a single republic or prince ruling it. Although the church has resided in Italy and held temporal power here, it has not been powerful or skillful enough to occupy the rest of Italy and become its ruler. Nor has it been so weak that for fear of losing control of its temporal possessions, it refused to call in foreign powers to defend it against anyone in Italy who had become too powerful. There are many examples from our distant past, such as when the Pope called upon Charlemagne to drive out the Lombards, who practically ruled all of Italy. And there are also examples from our own times, as when with the help of France, the church seized power from the Venetians and then proceeded to drive the French out with the help of the Swiss. The church has not been powerful enough to occupy Italy, nor has it allowed anyone else to occupy it either. Hence, the church has been the reason why Italy remains under many princes and lords, unable to unite under a single ruler. So,
All right. So I just want to thank both you guys for showing up. And
Yes, thank you very much.
if
Thank
he's
you.
if he's listening or watches later on, I want to thank a subscriber, Uncle Rufus, who actually proposed this in the comments of another video. So this is Tyler Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.